Hey everyone, welcome to Beyond the Raise podcast, where we get under the hood of founder scaling stories. Will and I are here with Nick Taylor, co-founder and CEO of Building Atlas. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Welcome. So what we normally sort of start with is just a little bit more about, the business and, I guess in one sort of quick sentence, what is it that the company does?
So Building Atlas is a platform for helping people understand how to make buildings more energy efficient, more carbon efficient, basically.
Yeah. And is that large scale commercial? Would you look at residential, or is that not worth it for you in terms of the resi market?
Yeah, we tend to focus on everything that isn't a single family home. So it's, commercial, industrial, schools, hospitals, student accommodation, social housing, just not kind of one-to-one to owners of houses, just because the scale is not worth it. It's a different kind of business, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. No, fair enough. And what was it then? We're sort of finding, to be honest with you, we're talking to a lot of founders that are in that sort of energy efficiency space. Is that sort of where you would sort of class it, or is it sort of, yeah? What is it about that you thought there is a gap here? There is a big problem that we need to solve.
So my previous role, I was a founder of a startup in Google's internal startup incubator, and we built a platform for businesses to work out how to improve their carbon footprint, in essence, and across lots of different things in their supply chain. So that was things like tech and travel, but also buildings. Those are kind of three things that most, I guess, non-industrial businesses have as their challenges. And actually realized kind of obviously things like tech and travel, there are known answers to that problem, but especially in non-residential real estate, actually knowing what to do, it's a surprisingly underserved market. And, you have to basically send a human around each building. And I picture a person with a clipboard kind of like prodding and poking things. And it just doesn't scale, right? Like there's, millions of buildings in the country that need to be made more efficient. And especially in today's climate, that's not necessarily about carbon reduction, but actually might just be, I just want to spend less on energy. And people are desperate for that, and there just weren't the tools in the market, basically.
Okay, interesting. I think when you and I were speaking a couple of weeks ago, perhaps, but I remember sort of saying the story. I saw that documentary about Canary Wharf, and it was 11 o'clock at night, and basically all of the towers' lights were on. And fair enough, people were asking, well, why? I mean, yeah, sure, buildings are being cleaned, but not every office and every floor in every building. And I would imagine that's a very simple, well, there's a quick win with that for sure. But I imagine that's technologically wise advanced massively in terms of what the opportunity is. Turn the lights off is one, plugs that sense when the monitors aren't being used, turn those off as well completely rather than being on standby, etc. But what other sorts of things are we now looking at? And maybe what's even more exciting about the future of what we're trying to do here?
So you mentioned those things. And yes, for sure, they've moved on. And there's a lot better technology around kind of controlling the systems in buildings. But actually, you'd be very surprised at how few people adopt those things. And probably the worst performing buildings are the buildings that were built maybe 10, 20 years ago, where they have kind of smart systems for controlling heating and cooling, but actually they don't talk to each other. So, there are an amazing number of buildings that are both heated and cooled at the same time, for example. Obviously, it's putting solar panels on the roof, it's better insulation, it is doing those things like understanding when the building's occupied and turning things off. More modern solutions like infrared heating rather than radiators to actually you kind of heat the people rather than the space. Which means, especially in something like a warehouse, you might just heat the space where actually the people go rather than, stuff you store, or at least at different temperatures. Things like district heat networks these days. So actually taking heat from maybe a data center or some industrial plant and using that heat. And actually in London, great example of that is taking heat from the tube and heating housing with it. So there's those kind of systems. The big thing for us is, you might own hundreds of buildings across the country, and they could be anything from little doctor surgeries to retail parks or whatever. But how do you think about that at scale? How do you do them all? And what's the best ROI for, I just want to save money, but where do I direct my kind of scarce budget, in essence?
Yeah. Do you think a lot of the strategies that are now coming into play are because people don't bother doing the simple things like turning the lights off, heaters, heatings, monitors on standby? Because if we did all of that, if everyone did all of that, or it was automated so we didn't have to because we won't, would that solve or help an awful lot?
Massively. We actually put out a white paper last year called the beauty and boring buildings. And it's actually because companies, what they tend to do is pick one big showcase office location. And actually, you give Canary Wharf as a good example. Like HSBC are moving out of their building in Canary Wharf, and it's going to cost £1 billion to retrofit the building. And obviously, they're going to modernize it, turn it into apartments and stuff as well. But a lot of that is energy efficiency stuff. But actually, if what you went and did is all of those little local corner shops, doctors' surgeries, whatever it might be, post offices, all of those kind of things, and you go, actually, what we want to do is put smart heating controls, we'll turn the lights off, we'll make sure they're LED bulbs, we'll put some more roof insulation in. That is way cheaper per building. And in essence, you get much more for your pound in doing that, in just making people, one, pay less for energy, and two, be much more carbon efficient and better for the grid and all of those things. That's way better, way more effective than doing that one shiny building. But it's harder because you have to run it as a program. And as I say, like, there's a high cost in understanding what measures for each building. And that's kind of where we come in of like, no, you can just do 1,000 buildings cheaply rather than one perfectly, and you'll have much more impact.
Fascinating.
It is fascinating.
All good.
Quick one on that. Do you find, because the relationship between the sort of ROI of that seems quite linear when you're talking about it in a residential setting. Have you found that there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of sort of adoption or getting your stakeholders all on board with this and a commercial setting where, like Alex, you gave the example, people probably are, I don't want to say don't care, but it doesn't feel like there's as much of a connection when it's their own utility bill, electricity bill. Have you found that at all? Has that been something you've had to overcome?
Yeah, for sure. I think for a bunch of different reasons. Some people, they own property like it's just like another asset, like gold or whatever, and they don't even think of it as a kind of living thing, right? They used to buying a building, holding it, get rent from the tenant so it covers itself, and then some years later they sell it and they've made money, right? Like, because that's what the property market does. One, the property market doesn't really do that so much anymore, especially things like COVID have changed it a lot. Two, you have the split incentive between the tenant in the building and the landlord, because if the tenant's paying the energy bills, why does the landlord want to put solar PV on the roof? And actually, there is some correlation there, because especially we see it in rent, because obviously if you say, well, I'm going to halve your energy bill, then you can demand a bit more in rent because it's super cheap to run. But actually that doesn't necessarily always translate into the sale value. And so I think there's actually a bunch of opportunity in the market for those things. But for sure, it's a lot more complicated. And also, like, there's mixed things. Some landlords, some owners of the buildings, they literally just don't care, right? Like, they're just in it for the money. And especially because they cycle properties in their portfolio, they kind of think, when you get to like 2050, we will definitely not own this building anymore, so it's not my problem. And unless regulation forces them to do something about it, then they don't really care. On the other hand, you've got more, especially you look like prime central London, like Google buildings or something like that, where they've got their own net zero targets that are more aggressive than the landlords. Then the landlord is worried that the tenant will move out if they don't make the building green enough or energy efficient enough. So it's massively varied, and it's a lot different because they're thinking much more transactionally. Like, if it's your own home, you're probably going to keep it for a long time. So you're not thinking, when you put solar on the roof, you're thinking about your bills. You're not thinking about the resale value of the house anywhere near as much as you would if it's a commercial property.
Brilliant. That's annoying. Will's gone. Okay, I'll mark that there because it'll go on to Will's section next. If he does drop off again, you and I will just continue.
Yeah, all right.
Because I can't ask you to do it again. And it's interesting stuff. But I don't think we can do another 8 minutes of the same chat, can we?
No, I'm good. We're doing it twice.
Yeah. That's really interesting stuff you're just saying there about the landlord and why would they do it? Yeah, but then interesting about Google being a tenant that's got more aggressive net zero goals, that will put more pressure. So it's actually quite fascinating how this will all work out.
Yeah, it's really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and especially when you've got a player like Google and you're the landlord, you don't want to lose a tenant like them, I'd imagine.
Right. Yeah.
Because I work with a company. We do a lot with e-energy, who are very much about energy efficiency in schools, but much more LED lighting, rooftop solar, or maybe a bit of ground mounted. But they've done about 1,100 projects, invested, I don't know, 90 million. They've just got another sort of credit line for 100 million so they can start funding the schools.
Nice.
But it's interesting, the dichotomy that they have. It's not what they're selling, because do you want to become more greener? Do you want to save money on your energy bills? Well, yes and yes, that's pretty easy, right? But it's actually when they bring in the notion of, well, we may be able to fund it for you as well, and then you pay it back by some sort of PPA, they go, well, that sounds too good to be true. And
Yeah, it's
that's
not,
actually
right?
the,
Like
the
that
no, no,
actually,
exactly. But, in public sector, maybe not quite as commercial, maybe don't know about these things, but that's actually the bigger challenge they have. It's that trust element of them, the schools saying, that just sounds too good to be true. I'm not convinced by this. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I'll see how Will's getting on, and then maybe you and I will just continue. Okay, fine. He says it's just going to disrupt the flow, so you guys crack on. Which is cool. Right, I'll do another marker and then we'll get into the next section. Due to technical issues, I think we've lost Will there. Hopefully he can rejoin, but if not, we'll just carry on going. Moving on then to a bit more about, the sort of the company, maybe perhaps before any sort of raising, etc. So what did the company look like in the early days?
So the initial idea was myself and another colleague from Google, and as I mentioned, we'd thought about this idea for a little while, and having sort of finished successful program there, trying to work out what to do for ourselves and thinking about doing that on our own, it felt like the right time in both of our careers and in the industry, and like this was a good moment. So we spent some time kind of doing a bunch of research of what might this be. And she and I, not super deep in the built environment, although she'd done a master's in building materials and circularity, was a good starting point. And we knew there was a problem there. And so we went and found a couple of other people to help us, one full-time and one part-time, people who really knew the built environment very well. And have led us to be convinced with a lot of interviewing of people, potential customers, partners, people in the industry already, that it was not a crazy idea. So we founded the company and then set about raising money. In essence, we sort of convinced ourselves that we knew what the problem was and how to fix it, but none of us were software engineers. So then we needed the software engineering skills and to build out the platform. These days you might maybe vibe code something, but a couple of years ago that wasn't quite the thing. So we set about raising money, and initially we thought we would raise an angel round just to kind of get ourselves off the ground, but actually fairly quickly we were convinced that raising a VC round was probably the more sensible thing to do.
Right. Okay. I think there's a couple of things in that. One, I think it's very brave to go into an industry or a sector where you haven't got years and years of experience, but you're right, there was clearly a problem. The other thing that we sort of have found over the years of helping, the clean tech market scale is that companies that start with that scenario scale more quickly because the founders are just clearer and better at saying, I can't do that job. So they're much better at saying, well, this is what I bring. I'm really good at that and I back myself. But however, I know we need X, Y, and Z. Whereas I think founders that have maybe are in it, which is probably the more common scenario, they fall into this bit of trap of the chief of effing everything and spinning all of the plates. I'm no, I'll be able to do that and I can do that and I can do that. And all of a sudden they're the bottleneck because this one human, there's only so much you can do. So actually, I think it's a really good thing that when companies have gone the route that you have for exactly that reason, it drives the business forward quicker because you have to. You've no choice.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, inevitably we have a bit of the kind of startup. Everyone does a bit of everything, and we all muck in, and we're none of us perfect in the job that we do. But I definitely think there's a lot more of that, of like, okay, well, I can't do sales and software engineering and this and that and the other. So we knew what we knew and we knew what we needed. I think when we got started.
Yeah. So then, interestingly, because normally I would ask what nearly killed the business, and the quite common answer is, well, probably me, because we were just causing our own bottlenecks without realizing. If you're head down windmilling, you don't see it. If you're outside looking in, you go, well, you're the problem, I'm afraid. So it's going to be different for you guys. This is going to be interesting. But so what did nearly slow or kill the business at that sort of point, would you say?
That's a good question. I think it took a while to refine our pitch. I think we spend a long time talking to different people about fundraising. And I think there were certainly a moment at that point where we almost gave up. And I think, interestingly, we were leaning very heavily on kind of climate and save the world, and that was a lot of the kind of mission for starting the company. Like, oh well, we need to make buildings greener. And I think actually then when we spoke to kind of climate VCs, they're like, yeah, no, like buildings are too hard. We're not interested. We don't want to get in that world. You're never going to achieve it. And actually then when we spoke to proptech VCs, it was almost the other way, which is, no, this is a really crowded space. There's lots of people trying to make buildings better. And there's somewhere in the middle, which is like, well, we're not just a consultancy. We are not generic real estate tech. This is the thing that we're trying to achieve. And it's actually quite niche. And I don't believe there are really many people in the market doing it. And getting to that point where it's a lot more pragmatic of like, this is about money. It's about saving money. It's about energy efficiency. It's about reducing your bills. The greenness is a side effect of that. And then I think when we kind of landed there more clearly, then started making a difference.
Because is there not surely from a, capital growth of the building perspective, higher leasing for tenants and rents, is that more of the commercial mindset and goal that's going to resonate, do you think?
Yeah. Fundamentally, yeah, that's it. It's always about, I guess we kind of describe it almost these days as future-proofing the building.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say future-proofing. So you've made it so your business is more valuable. But also, by the way, there's some good news. There's a good mission over here where you're actually being greener. Okay, fine. And then what about in terms of scaling? It sounds like there with the pitch, was it because you didn't have the right commercial person in? But what about sort of that growth piece was harder than you expected? Was it, was it sales? Was it product? Was it regulation? Was it just hiring in general?
All of the above. I think a bit of everything. I think, hiring the right people is always hard. I think we're lucky, at least, privileged perhaps, to have had lots of experience. I've worked lots of different places, big and small, put together a fairly rigorous kind of recruiting process of like how we interview people and who we wanted. We spent quite a lot of time understanding what the shape of the team should be. And even then we made some mistakes in hiring. It's not like our team is all the people that we hired and everyone was successful. But I think that's also inevitable, right? Like, I think not everyone's going to be a perfect fit and you're never going to know that straight away. But I think we did as well as we could. I think also the market is slow. Obviously, regulations that we'd hoped for haven't come. There's been the general kind of tide turning away from sustainability and ESG as a thing. Obviously, that's mostly in the US, but it's affected Europe and the UK as well. And then kind of pivots of what's going on in the world, right? Like, wars pushing up the price of oil is for everyone, but at the same time, in a way, good for us because it drives, you can just be explicit and say, well, your heating price is going to go up. Let's make that better. But then that does shift what you're going to do to your buildings, for example. So then we have to shift a bit the way the product works. We shift the messaging to customers. So yeah, it's been a bumpy journey, but
yeah. And how customizable is the product? Is it not surely this is what we do? Or can you, okay, well, that building wants that, we can tweak that bit and we won't do that part?
So yes, it's customizable. Also, so you can say, what's my goal? So I want to get to net zero, or I want to optimize for the most energy efficiency measures. Like how do I save the most energy? How do I reduce my bills the most versus... actually, if you switch from gas to electricity, if you put it in a heat pump, payback periods on heat pumps are terrible because electricity is so much more expensive than gas in the UK. And that means your heat pump, even though it's way more efficient than a gas boiler, it's not 5 times more efficient. It's only 3 times more efficient. And so actually, it's not a great payback. So, there are circumstances where that works, but actually just finding ways, insulation, LED lights, whatever, there are different things.
Yeah. Okay. And what's the company size at the moment?
We are 8 at the moment.
Fine. And then was there, because quite often we also find that the first few hires normally work out pretty well, and then it's the next batch where it's a bit like, oh, okay, that's not worked out. Have you found that same sort of like the core group of the core group, but then getting from maybe 4 of you to 8 has been actually quite challenging with people just not fitting?
Yeah, a little bit. I think, the first handful of people we hired stayed, and then we had a bit more churn as we kind of took the second round. Exactly that.
Yeah.
Why
do you think that was?
I think it's a few things. Obviously, the first hires are very bought into the mission of the company. And when there's nothing built yet, people come in and they want to shape it themselves and really feel passionate about what you're building. I think inevitably, as you start to hire more people, one, you've got an established culture, you've got ways of working, even technology choices or whatever it might be. You have to fit in with the personalities that they're already. And also, I think it's a shift to, even at that early stage, people who are more just here to do a job rather than here to believe the vision. Even as, employee number 5, even at that point, you're already starting to feel that, I think.
Yeah, I personally feel that's the critical piece. Because maybe you're not giving equity away anymore. Or if you are, it's a different journey. So it is, unfortunately, it's a job. And you just never know with people until they're actually in the seat doing what they say they can do, whether that's 100% what will be. So it is really challenging. So with that in mind, then what would you say was the first hire that sort of truly changed the trajectory, or sometimes maybe just really lightened the load for you guys to actually go, why didn't we get this person in sooner?
That's a good question. I think, all of them. Obviously, as I said, we needed to hire software engineers.
Mm.
Think beyond that, we've actually had a bunch of kind of external help as well on kind of go to market and things like that, which have been useful. I think in many different ways. And actually, we've kind of gone up and come down and gone up again in the number of people. And there's also an interesting reflection that we hired quite a few people quite quickly, and that has its own overhead.
Yep.
And so making sure that, it sounds weird, but because you don't really want a hierarchy in such a small company, but at least knowing roles and responsibilities and who does what, so that we're not spending lots of time meeting and debating priorities. We're just getting on with work. I think that's a super important thing as well.
Yeah, with the last business that I was involved in that we scaled fairly heavily, one thing we were militant on was we called it your 1 meter squared, and it was very clearly defined. But it was actually the reason why we did it is because I think we were all, nice people and kind and wanted to help one another. And I think that actually became a negative thing. So it's like, no, I'll just do that. I'll do that. And everyone's doing that in a board meeting. You're sort of coming out of it going, who's doing what? I'm so confused. We introduced this 1 meter squared. It was so helpful to just, someone would say, well, what I'm going to focus on next month, the next 4 weeks is blah, blah, blah. You go, sorry, that sounds like my job. And it comes from a good place, but it really causes bottlenecks and slows everything down. So that's quite interesting. And then have you made any sort of hires where you thought this is a risky move for us, either because they were expensive, but you needed it, or just because it looked risky in terms of not from the sector, but actually has worked out really, really well?
I think probably on the sales side, it's something we debated. I'm not a natural salesperson, but I was doing a lot of our selling to begin with, and I think there's always the tension of early in a startup. Everyone says early in a startup it should be founder-led sales, and I think that's true, and it's all about relationships. But I think for us, especially coming in a little bit from the outside, has pros and cons of, well, I'm taking a different approach. We're talking about, doing this tech and data rather than, person with a clipboard, like I said. But actually then some credibility in the industry is really important. And so we hired someone to help with sales who was, salespeople tend to be expensive. And so I think that's always a bit risky, but I think it's paid off for us for sure.
That's good. Yeah, that's really good to hear. And then everyone sort of talks about the importance of a good hire. You got to make the right hires, the right people, and make people jump through lots of hoops to make sure you don't make any mistakes. That's not realistic. Also, when you're a startup, you have to be careful about how much you make people jump through hoops, because Google might be knocking on the door as well, and competing with that is challenging. But there's lots of different value add you can offer as a startup, and it depends on the person, of course. I guess the question I'm keen to hear more on is for you guys, and I don't want to say bad hires, but what does a bad hire cost at the stage you guys are, like emotionally, commercially, the time?
I think the important thing is being confident to make a decision that it wasn't the right hire. I think you're right to say not a bad hire, because I think, it might be on us that people aren't the right fit. Actually, maybe we didn't sell it right, or maybe our culture is just different than they expected, or even the work for that matter. So we've had a few people who joined and didn't stay. And I think the most important thing is, as I say, is we set a probation period, we set goals, we're clear on how to do that. And then I think in a weird way, actually, the rest of the team see that as a positive. That you've got a process in place that I don't think there's been any situation where people have been surprised, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I think that's a sign of a good process. What does it cost? It can cost in recruitment fees, it costs in time, it costs in emotion. You invest in someone, and obviously when you're a small team and why am I hiring someone? Because I've got some stuff for them to do. And obviously then that doesn't get done for a few months because they need replacing, or it gets part done and needs redoing or whatever. So it's a velocity thing. I think there's some There's some emotion, there's some financial cost in that. I think it's manageable. I think it's inevitable. I think if you go into that with your eyes open and know it's going to happen, then having ways to fix it as fast as possible and that you learn from it, that's the best you can ask, I think.
Yeah, and I think when you're small, the key skill there is identifying it and getting on with it. Because if you've then got someone who, it's clearly not working, maybe there's a bit of toxicity that spreads like wildfire in a small business, and they might take a couple of people out because they just get sucked into that as well. So I think you're right. For me, that's the most important bit, is getting on with it ASAP. So it sounds like selling into the market for you guys is quite challenging, both from a raising standpoint, but it sounds like you've cracked that in terms of the byproduct is actually what you're trying to achieve. The commercial aspect is what really lands. In terms of the buildings then, or the landlords, or that sale to those people, how do you get to the point where you're having the right conversation? Because as you said earlier, some might be energy efficiency, it might be improve the commerciality, but without knowing that pain point, I would imagine it's very hard to get in front of those people to have the right conversation to even get them interested in at the table in the first place.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, yes, and the property industry is well known to be slow and risk averse, and some newfangled technology company coming in to say that they're going to solve the world. I mean, we did quite a lot of research up front, and we've done lots of kind of trawling around for, who is our ICP, like who is the right customer, and then knowing the people in those customers and what the message is, right? So obviously if you go and speak to a CFO, it is for sure all about the money. They have sustainability people who are paying for surveyors to go and look at the buildings and do things that are just expensive and slow. So it's about knowing the message for the role and building a network, right? Like we go to a lot of events, as I say, like having salespeople, having people help us in general. And also to an extent, we work with consultancies and engineering firms as partners who use our platform with their clients. So there's a bit of all of that, but yeah, it's a lot. And even, marketing materials, white papers, all of those kind of traditional things of just being there. It's definitely an industry where you just kind of need to be present, basically.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of noise in the space, like, some of the sort of VCs you alluded to earlier. There's a lot of people trying to do this, but I think, and you'll know better than me, but from our experience in this space, there's a lot of people trying to do parts of what you guys are doing, not necessarily that whole piece. I might be wrong in that, but you tell me. So it does sound like your offering is quite different actually to a lot of people in the market, because they're not in the same market. Part of what you do. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And there's lots of, also kind of lots of solution providers that, it's like, obviously it's very true in residential. If you're thinking of making your house greener, actually probably what you do is, or you Google roughly the right ideas. And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go and get a quote for solar. I'm going to get a quote for insulation. Obviously in kind of larger scale and commercial buildings, maybe you've got a property management firm who does that for you. But that view of what are all the different things I could do and how does that work across all of my buildings, there really aren't many people that think of it that way.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Something that I'm always interested in, because I've definitely been sucked into this as well in the past, is I think when you're in new business, you got a customer that says yes, you just try and make that work no matter what, right? We've got someone who's interested. We have to make this sale. We have to make this deal. But actually, quite often, what I found in the past is they're quite often not the right type of customer for many reasons. And in our industry, it's all different. But did you sort of find that there was a certain type of customer that perhaps you were going after because you got a yes and you got sucked into that part of the market that was a distraction, or maybe not a whole demographic of customers, but maybe a handful that actually in the bigger picture maybe wasn't the right avenue to go after?
Not fundamentally. I think we certainly had a bunch of conversations with, I think for us, I mentioned those kind of boring buildings, and for us, what we do well is model buildings where you've got lots of them and they're not super special snowflakes. Every building is different, but some of them are more different. And actually, you gave the example way back at the beginning of kind of Canary Wharf. If you own 5 skyscrapers, they've got massively complicated systems in them. They're super valuable buildings. If you're going to make them more efficient, it is absolutely worth your time and money to send a specialist consultant or team or engineering firm to go and look and make a really bespoke plan for that building. If you've got corner shops in, little towns across the country, no, because that's very expensive to send the same consultant for a way less expensive project. And I think we spent a bit of time talking to big scale property owners and actually skewing a little too far on the, we've got the snowflakes. You own massive complex industrial part. I'm not going to model with my software. I'm going to be very naive when I do that. Whereas if you've got a slightly more simple building, then it's much better for us. And I definitely think we spent a bit of time talking to the wrong people early on. And correspondingly, the kind of organizations they work with, so consultancies, engineering firms, whatever, I think it took us a bit of time to get there. They're also the same people that you alluded to. They want special custom integrations to all of their systems and enterprisey things that we just weren't ready for.
Yeah.
So I think we did spend a bit of time there thinking, oh, well, there's value in that bit of the market, but actually it's less relevant for us, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. One of my favorite questions: if you could start again, what would you do differently?
Oh, that's a good question.
Just to let you know, we've only got a couple of minutes, all right?
Yeah, it depends what day you ask. I think there are some days where I wouldn't have started in the first place. I think I would have been more ruthless in knowing the specific targets in the industry before we started. I think, as I kind of said, we spent a bit of time talking to different flavors of customers and kind of refining the message. I think we hired some great software engineers, but I think probably better articulating our product and our product process early on. Like, how do we iterate software? I think we suffered a bit we came from big companies and tried to make big company process in a small business and then realized that didn't work. So yeah, some of that would have been useful. That's probably about it, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good one, because it is vastly different, which actually there's another question that springs to mind in that case. So what was a belief you had about startups, having been with the big boys in your game, that you've now completely changed your mind on?
I think I suffered a little bit from something that is quite well known, which is people that come out of a place like Google and make a startup, you just kind of assume it's going to work. And I think there was a bit of arrogance in there of like, well, this is a problem that everyone has, and sure, it's just going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I think the scrappiness and the fire that, especially if you're, a 20-something straight out of uni and you get a bit of money and you start making a startup or you bootstrap it, I think there's a thirst and a fire that I think it perhaps took me a little while to develop. And I certainly feel it now. And especially, as we're trying to scale and we'll try and raise again, think, yes, I've certainly realized the pace that needs. It took a little while to get there, but we definitely feel it now.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because actually I feel that blind belief that what you are doing will work is 100% needed when you're doing a startup. You have to truly believe that what you're doing is that little bit different to your best competitor. You offering something that the market will buy a little bit more. You have to have that belief. Otherwise, it's hard, and you will just get to a point and go, just another, we're all basically the same, we're all scrapping for the same business. I don't know if I've got it in me, and that's really, really common. I speak to people all the time that are just burnt out and not enjoying it.
Yeah.
You have to get to a point.
It depends which day you ask me.
Yeah, exactly. Highs and lows, the roller coaster. What would you give to a founder who's 12 months behind you? What advice would you give him? Or even further, 12, 18 months, whatever.
In this industry or in general?
Yeah. Well, both.
I think that kind of, I guess it's fairly obvious point, but I'm not sure everyone sees it, is, really, really deeply focus on your customer's pain. And ultimately in almost all of these things, it's always about the money, right? It's how to make them more efficient, better, make more money themselves, save money. Whatever you're doing or building, that's kind of what it comes down to, is how do you make your customer's business more successful and more profitable? And I think also is something I learned a while ago in my career of, find people in your customer organizations who you can make feel successful.
Yeah.
And I think for us, we had the passion of what needs to be done, but as you kind of alluded to earlier, of the specific individuals and how that translates for them, And that, that might even be as mundane as, well, yeah, but this person just, every Monday morning they make this really ugly report and it's entirely pointless. And we all know it's entirely pointless. But actually, if you try and make it go away, you'll probably won't achieve that. If what you can do is make them just click a button and they get their Monday morning report and it's pretty and generated for them, that's way more useful than trying to fight the system and get rid of that Monday morning report, right? Like if you try and radically change the process, you can try and do that in the long run, but actually you've made a champion because you've just made their life a bit easier, right? And I think doing those things is super important.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point. So then moving forward to sort of a bit more about the future, what sort of, capability or function do you feel is going to be absolutely critical for you guys in the next 12, 18 months?
I think probably like everyone, more AI stuff. We're embedding more and more AI. So when we started, very data heavy, very focused on machine learning, which almost slightly feels old fashioned these days. Using kind of LLMs and embedding AI much more in our systems and actually in our business processes is a big thing. And correspondingly, just more advanced kind of data science, I think, is a thing for us. Inevitably, the next things we're starting to think about are international expansion. So we focus very heavily on the UK, but doing that internationally means data people, sales people, partner people in other places than the UK. So I think that's probably coming up for us as well.
Yeah, very challenging. Do you feel that would mean one of you guys would have to go to the US or wherever you're thinking to lead that? Or do you hope you could find someone on the ground, which is obviously very, very challenging?
It's complicated. I think for us, Europe is next much more than the US. We have a not quite competitor business in the US who actually I'm very good chats with the CEO of. And so I think, we're deliberately not fighting, I guess. Like it's a big investment to go to the US and likewise for them to come to Europe. But I think more likely, because it's same time zone and things like that, actually it will just be hires locally rather than one of us going. Remains to be seen.
Yeah. Well, I've actually done it both ways. Hired people that I know on the ground that haven't worked out in the US and Europe, funny enough, that haven't worked out. And I would have bet my house on backing those people because I knew them. I'd worked with them before. But sometimes people, when they don't have a boss in the office with them, they're not the same as when perhaps you worked with them as their boss. That was a very hard lesson to learn, but you learn these things, and actually you can get incredible talent that's local and more bought into the mission than the bloke you used to work with who was great. You know what I mean? So it can actually be a really positive thing, but I had to go through that journey and mess it up to find that out, unfortunately. What kind of sort of leader or profile then do you feel you'll eventually need, but right now that wouldn't be a hire that would be a waste, effectively?
It's a good question. I guess all the kind of big company things like, hiring a CFO and those kind of, HR type people are things that we don't need right now. I think we manage pretty well. And I think we've been quite lean in our software engineering. I think actually interesting with the advent of things like, some of the AI things, we can move a lot faster on helping customer success, being more reactive. And so we probably need less of those things than I thought we would as well.
That's good.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to see how some of those things, kind of AI stuff, actually impacts a bunch of those, what you would see as fairly traditional hires in a business like ours.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the businesses that are adopting that, and not just for admin efficiencies, which, let's face it, I think probably 95% of business, that's what they use it for, which is no problem at all. But there are some huge gains to use it in very different ways. And that, if you can save yourself, maybe even not having to hire a function due to it, I mean, that's real gains. Brilliant. Well, look, Nick, thank you for your time. That's been fascinating and interesting chat, and good to, get under the hood of it a little bit more. Thanks.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers. Okay, right. That was great. Thanks for that. It was really interesting, actually. Some of the stuff you said there, I thought a lot of people will enjoy that. And I think the part of the market you're in, I think is a fascinating space for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm just going to stop the